A warm welcome to Diplomatic Channel this week. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week we feature a special interview with the new United Nations Special Advisor for Africa, Ahunna Ezeakonwa, a remarkable woman who's grown through the ranks in the United Nations. Before her appointment as Special Advisor, Akunna was Regional Director of the United Nations Development Programme. She has been working to harness the potential of young people on the continent by creating digital hubs. Recently, during the Open Source Week for the UNDP, she launched the Africa Accelerator for Digital Public Infrastructure, a bold new initiative to help countries design, finance, and implement trusted, interoperable, and digital infrastructure that delivers at scale. Ahuna steps into her new role as Special Advisor on Africa with about 3 decades of experience at the United Nations, serving in multiple leadership roles across Africa and at the UN headquarters in New York. Without further ado, let's get into the interview. Ahuna Ezeakonwa, thank you so much for speaking with us and congratulations on your new appointments as new Special Advisor on Africa by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. How did you feel when you learned that you had been given this responsibility? What was that like for you?
Well, thank you so much first of all, for having me. It's great to be back in Nigeria. No, I think I have a deep sense of gratitude. When you say, how do you feel? I think when I got the announcement, I felt deeply grateful to the Secretary General of the United Nations for considering me for this position, because in a way it's a dream job, having spent 30 years working for the United Nations, mostly on African matters. So it felt right. It felt, this would be the crowning experience of my time as an international civil servant, but also one that's been quite passionate about Africa rising to its full potential in the global order. So it was, very comforting. I felt very encouraged, but I felt most of all grateful to our UN Secretary General for the confidence, the trust.
So, did you at some point give yourself a hug, a pat on the back? Perhaps, were you a bit tearful when you realized you'd come full circle, this had been a life mission for you, and you were finally living it?
Look, I'm a spiritual person. I believe in God. So the first, of course, was a sense of purpose and faith. And, the fact that this is what God really wanted me to do. This is where I've landed in terms of my purpose. But also, what really moved me was the response that I got from around the continent and around the world, and people really embracing the appointment as my next step, and the outpouring of goodwill, of best wishes. It felt like this wasn't just my success or my job, that this was a collective victory for my staff that I've worked with over the years, for friends, for Africans, for the United Nations colleagues who have accompanied me over the years. So I felt a great sense of community around it.
I'm sure there are a lot of women are also looking up to you, in this role. A lot of women are saying, if she can do it, I can do it. A lot of women in Nigeria as well are also saying, if she can do it, she can rise to this level, be this impactful, then so can I. What do you say to them?
Yes, I think this is something that you're not normally conscious of this until people start to speak to you, because me, I'm a very simple person, just doing my job at the UN. So it's not until people start saying how much they're looking up and saying that, your position there gives us the hope that there's a chance for us. And then you realize that it is a massive responsibility to continue to open doors for others who have these aspirations. And this has always been my core principle, that I don't like being the first or the last. I think that we have to use every position that we get to crack open the doors for others who are coming after us. And that requires leading responsibly, having integrity and making sure that your values, are shining as you lead.
We know that Africa is emerging in a changing world. The geopolitical landscape is shifting, growing competition for, among major powers for influence. How do we ensure that the continent is treated as an equal strategic partner rather than simply a source of critical resources?
Look, the reason why it's been really I've had a sense of pride about working for this current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, because he's always projected Africa as a continent that should lead, that has assets, and that should be respected. I think what he states about Africa is really what I believe, which is Africa's time on Africa's terms. That's all. That's really captures the way he's related to the continent, and I think that is what I carry with me into this position. That it is about really bringing that knowledge to the world, a world that is actually quite divided right now. That there is a place called Africa which should not be written off as a charity case or as a place where you just simply discuss what you do to help Africa, but seen as a legitimate partner in building a world where everyone feels safe and feels taken care of. Next year, Africa will host COP32 in Addis Ababa, and we hope to feature all of Africa's solutions in along the path of climate change. So, we talk about Africa having all the minerals that will power a net zero world, whether it's in terms of rare earth, lithium. I think we're counting at over 30% of the world's resources, mineral resources on the continent. What does that mean for the agency of the continent? So Africa's voice is going to be a lot stronger because it has something that the world needs. But it has to be on its terms. It has to be presented in such a way that the continent is also benefiting, because it does have a lot of deficits.
When you talk about dormant capital, I'm just wondering, if you think, African leaders really don't know about this. I mean, unfortunately, the continent has a narrative of, having corrupt leaders and so on, mismanagement of resources and all of that. You don't think that they're aware that there is dormant capital?
Look, I think the system, the financial system, is kind of rigged against progress on the continent. The way the architecture is set up, countries are told that, unless you can park this amount of money abroad, your credit will not allow you to borrow more. So there are formulas, there are structures that are designed in such a way that they don't actually favor the continent mobilizing the capital that it generates for its own development. So it's really interrogating that space now. And it's not just all about illicit financial flows, which is already quite significant. I mean, we're talking tens of billions of dollars of leaving the continent on a yearly basis that could be drawn back. That space, Africa doesn't have total control, because there are all those legal structures that. But there is a space of domestic resources that Africa still controls and can control, but just needs to channel it better. And this is the kind of capital I'm talking about. And it's different in every country, but countries need to look at their sovereign wealth funds. They need to look at their pension funds. They need to look at the way they manage them and how they can liberate capital for their development, for infrastructure development, for energy. A lot of it could come from within, but there's also taxes, UNDP has been working on tax administration, for instance. We know that it's not just about raising taxes for the poor, for the small, medium enterprises, but there is a lot. The tax base is still quite narrow in many countries, and you can expand this. There are a lot of people who should be paying taxes who are not.
You're aware, that countries are resorting, some countries in Africa are resorting to military rule. They have ditched democracy. Are you concerned about that?
Well, first of all, let's put it in perspective. There are 55 African countries, 54 by UN terms, and we have about 5 or 6 who have gone in this direction. Still way too many, given the advancement that we've had in democracy over the years.
The region in which this has happened.
And the region, yes. So, yes, it's a concern. But for us, I think we actually did a study on this as UNDP and did a survey of African populations in the different countries that are affected, but also countries that are still promoting democracy. And I think what we found is that this isn't Africans saying, we don't want democracy. It's Africans saying, we want democracy that serves us, that works in our interest, not against us. So it's more like an outrage on how democracy is not delivering the development dividends and how it is manipulated, by or captured by the elite. And the citizens are asking for something different. They're not necessarily asking for the military. I don't believe that most of them believe that the military will bring the answer. But they want answers. They want something different. They want change. And so it's not, I don't think it's a movement against democracy. I think it's a movement against democracy that doesn't deliver for the people.
So, you said that people want change. Of course, it's not necessarily military governance. How can they rebuild confidence in democracy?
Well, they want change in different directions. I mean, one is accountable leadership. They want leaders that can be accountable. They want leaders that can root for them, that can build nations that work for everyone, not just for the few. They want service delivery, Governance is supposed to deliver services to the people. So when you don't have roads to get from A to B, when you're pregnant and you want to have a baby, you can't get a facility nearby to safely deliver your baby. When your children are not able to attend quality schools, right? Because the services of the schools are below standard, because there is not enough resourcing of those schools. When the opportunities that are created don't cover the ambition of the young people, even when they do go to school, they graduate and there are no jobs, So it is the death of hope that is really, I think, instigating and motivating the pushback on democracy. If democracy delivers hope, everybody will celebrate it, as we've seen indeed in quite a few countries where democracy has continued to triumph. But it's a work in progress. Democracy is not a given. Countries have to keep working at it and deepening that democracy. Institutions are really important, because if institutions are weak, then democracy is about personalities. We need to, and the personalities come and go. But also important to have policy consistency. Because it's not so much that we always have bad leadership, but the thing is, politics is short-term. There's a lot of short-termism around politics. So, this party comes into power this season, they finish, they do whatever they said they would do or not, and then the next transition happens, and those policies and initiatives are not carried forward. So we need to find a way to make democracy closely linked to development. So some people will call it developmental democracy, where party after party, administration after administration pursue a longer term goal that is meant to see to the country's development rather than this short term. And then it's interrupted and you start all over again. For me, actually, that's really what worries me the most about the type of democracy that we're pursuing on the African continent, apart from it not being fully inclusive.
We'll take a short break now. My conversation with Ahunna Ezeakonwa continues after. Stay with us. Now let's head back for the concluding part of my conversation with the UN Special Advisor on Africa, Ahunna Ezeakonwa. Now, I wonder if you had some thoughts about the, anti-immigrant attacks in South Africa and the fact that people are evacuating, people of other African nationalities are evacuating from South Africa. I wonder if you had a few thoughts about what was going on there.
Look, the South African government, I'm sure, is struggling with this because this is obviously a country that's received a lot of support from all over the continent. I grew up in the time of anti-apartheid movement. I was myself in South Africa when they had the all-white referendum under de Klerk, and I was, I was young, but a keen observer of what was going on there. But, for me, it was personal. For most of us coming out of a country like Nigeria, it was really a personal mission to see the end of apartheid. And so, fast forward to what's going on today, what you would wish is, at the very least, an understanding of the fact that we are one, and it's a larger question of free movement and integration of the continent. Now, today, we have quite a few countries on the continent that started to do a visa-free regime for Africans, Rwanda, Kenya, Burundi, and they're all happening now. So I think Africa needs to address this core question of free movement and regional integration. So otherwise South Africa will not be the last one. We will continue to have, particularly as the economic pressures happen and people feel a sense of, a deep sense of insecurity and vulnerability, So it's really how we come together as a continent to make real the united Africa that we're talking about in the African Union. That union has to be a people union, not just a union around states. So, we also now have the One Africa market. We have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. How are you going to implement that without institutionalized free movement, without legal frameworks that allow Africans to move freely and to do business freely across borders?
And speaking of the AfCFTA, do you think it's moving fast enough to transform intra-African trade, or do you think that, the old barriers are still holding it down, and possibly, what's going on in South Africa could also be a hindrance, to African integration?
Well, first of all, I think we need to celebrate this free trade agreement. I think sometimes we underestimate the power behind it, that today we have 50 countries in Africa that have ratified this. So it makes it automatically the largest free trade area in the world. First of all, pause on that. That is worth a celebration, right? So today we're no longer talking about signing agreements or getting the signatures. We have them. We also have 26 countries, more than half of those that have ratified, who have now completed their tariff-free offers. Which means in 26 countries, as an African entrepreneur, you can now access those markets tariff-free. That's great advancement. But, the details are still very complicated and complex because of the way the continent is structured. We still have these barriers that need to come off. But there is a promise. that AFCFTA brings on those barriers. The trade landscape is really littered with women entrepreneurs, young and old, who are basically, they've developed a lot of resilience over the years, but the barriers are too much. And AFCFTA promises to start bringing them down. Insecurity at the borders, for instance, for those who are doing cross-border trade. Logistics, the cost of moving goods and services across borders is way too high. How do we start to reduce that cost? Market information. We just had an event at the Leather Hub that Lagos State established. And we had some of the entrepreneurs there. We're asking them, what is it you need? Because you've got your business and you have your skills. What are you lacking? And most of them talked about market information. They want to expand their markets. They want to be able to access new markets. And that's what AFCFTA offers. 1.4 billion people market. Imagine if you would unleash women traders and give them easy access to 1.4 billion consumers. They will be unstoppable. Our economies will be transformed. So for me, AFCFTA is not just a trade agreement. It's a development strategy.
Speaking of small businesses, I mean, this is a lovely piece of equity cloth. And, before the interview, we talked about, how you had this woven somewhere in Abia State. Any chance that those women could also key into the AFCFTA?
Indeed. I mean, Akwete is a very traditional fabric. And actually, it's a whole community in Abia State that works on this, and they're very proud of it. So they keep it close to their chest. They don't want it corrupted. Of course, it is corrupted. You have it now printed in different countries, India, China, and it's hand woven, and they've kept it authentic, but it takes too long, and you'll never be able to produce enough, to satisfy the demand if you're just doing one piece for 2 weeks, but also with a small number of people. So, one of the things that we launched, I told you I just came from Abia with the governor of Abia State, Dr. Oti, is a manufacturing tech hub. As part of our Timbuktu initiative. This is a university innovation pod that we collaborated with the federal government and the state government to provide this space at the University of Michael Okpara in Umudike. And we went to commission it. And these women were in the room, displaying their wares. And we started to have a conversation because what is in this unipod are machines, cutting edge equipment and machines that help you to bring such detail and precision to your commodities and also to scale, to manufacture in a big way. And conversations now going on with our community as to how we can assist them to produce more and to access markets. Because Aba is, as you know, is the manufacturing hub of this country. And I think when we talk about AFCFTA, I was starting to say it's not just a trade agreement, it's also what's going to help Africa to industrialize. Because you don't trade, AFCFTA demands Africa content. So you don't trade what you don't produce.
So I'm assuming that 4 years from now, you'll still be in this role, and unless, of course, you run for the office of the UN Secretary General, becoming one of the few women who would possibly, get that role. What would success look like for you?
Wow. I mean, first of all, I think we need a world that works, right? For me, success would look like a reset of multilateralism. Right now, multilateralism is quite stressed and it's under stress. And you would say it's in retreat, because we're losing a lot of ground on the things that unify us as one human family. So I think for me, The starting point will be reconstructing that at the UN and making multilateralism not just about a certain part of the world, but a more inclusive multilateral system where the institutions cater for all nations. They're fair, they have fairer architecture, that when regions that are developing need assistance, say for instance post a pandemic, they can get that assistance just like anyone else, So the financial architecture needs to be reset and put more in tune with the needs of populations in our countries. The climate finance needs to be taken seriously because far too many countries are suffering the impact of climate change without necessarily contributing to it, such as our region, Africa. I'd like to see a global resolve following Paris to really put resources into adaptation as well as mitigation. I'd like to see a rebirth of diplomacy where you have diplomats trained and skilled in how they negotiate on the basis of mutual interest, not just national interest. We need a world that I think understands that we have intense interdependence, and we cannot afford to mismanage our interdependence.
Ahunna, thank you so much for speaking with us. I think I've been part of your journey, even though I came in somewhere, in the middle of it. Yeah, and I've enjoyed all the conversations I've had with you, learning from you about Africa. And I do agree, Africa should become part of the solution, should be the solution, to the world's problems. So grateful that, you get to take on this role of advising the UN, and I know that they will gain so much from you. The rest of the world would also benefit so much from the knowledge that you have. Wishing you all of the best and hoping that I get to reconnect with you, as you move ahead. Thank you again for speaking with us, sharing your knowledge with Channels TV and the rest of Africa.
Thank you so much.
This is where we end Diplomatic Channel this week. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.